Hello, should we start? All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first seminar of the XR Access Research Network. Just letting everyone know that we're recording this seminar. So thank you for being here today. We're here to talk about some of the many cool research happenings in AR/VR accessibility, learn more about Professor Brian Smith's work, and hopefully this seminar marks the first of many more insightful talks to come. So thank you for being here today. Just to introduce us. So next slide. So my name is Mahika Futane. I'm a PhD student at Cornell, and my colleague here who will be talking next is Ricardo. And he's also a PhD student at Cornell, and we're both advised under Professor Shri Azenkot, who's the director of the XR Access initiative here. So speaking of XR Access, if you have attended the symposium, you may have heard of XR Access. It was it's an organization founded in 2019, and we're really just all about AR/VR accessibility to be able to share the knowledge, the skills, the tools, talk about user experiences from the disability community, as well as the technologists, the programmers, researchers, and really sharing the same goal to make AR/VR technologies more accessible to people with different abilities. As part of the XR Access initiative, we have the research network through which this seminar is hosted by. So Ricardo, you can go ahead and talk more about that.
So hello everyone, I'm really happy to have you all here, and I hope that this seminar is a good start to get this network going. So what is the goal of the research network? What is our motivation? So we are working towards building a community where academia and industry can learn from each other, and also foster an environment where it's easier to make collaboration happen, right? So we want to present different events and opportunities. For example, here we are starting with a monthly seminar, but we also want you to give feedback on research that is being done by our colleagues in academia, and also we will have presenters from industry. And we will also like to share funding opportunities, which is a key aspect of making these collaborations be worthwhile for everyone, and also to actually implementing these accessibility solutions. Sorry. So very briefly here, I will have this slide again at the end, but if you want to get more involved with the XR Access and with a research network, you can join us at our Slack in the following links. I will share with all of you this later, and you can also follow us at Twitter at XR Access, or email us at info@xraccess.org. Yeah, so for today's speaker, we have the current director of the Computer-Enabled Abilities Laboratory at the University of Columbia. Throughout his life, he has enjoyed playing video games and was very into game development throughout his years as a college student and as a PhD student. Playing games like Terraformers and other games built specifically for blind people made him realize the stark difference between the gaming experience of blind gamers and sighted gamers. He believes that visuals are not as important for games to be fun, and that led him to believe that making truly blind accessible games is possible. I would like, please give a warm welcome to Professor Brian Smith.
Thanks a lot. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Now this is a blast to the past. I taught in Zoom, or at least hybrid, for for several semesters, and I haven't done that since. So here we go. Let's do this. Do that. And now I switch to Zoom. And now I share screen. Okay, perfect. Okay, can everyone see what I'm sharing?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. So, so my name is Brian Smith. I'm a professor at Columbia University. I direct the Computer-Enabled Abilities Lab. And today I'll be talking about AI and how it has the power to grant new abilities with a case study on video games for blind players. And so the lab, just to give a little bit of context, we work on several different flavors of research around AI, and that includes accessibility related research and research that's very relevant to XR access. That is like making it possible for people who are blind or people with visual impairments to perceive virtual worlds and explore them and have an engaging and fun time, a meaningful experience doing so. So we work in the space of accessibility, machine learning, games, and also social computing. I work part-time as a research scientist at Snap, which makes Snapchat. And so we're also doing some interesting research on how to better connect people using AI and using new forms of social computing systems. So this talk, we're going to focus on the intersection of accessibility and games. A lot of our work in the lab is driven by a viewpoint that computers and any kind of assistive technology is really an intermediary between users and the goals that they would like to accomplish with their lives. So you might have a computer in the middle, or it might be some piece of assistive technology. You have a person on the left. They have a lot of goals, some experiences that they would like to have, that they'd like to make possible in their lives: learning, finding a job, hobbies, travel, fun, food. And in a lot of ways, they focus their attention on that computer in order to access all of these new abilities. So computers have the power to grant people abilities. But there's also an understanding in our lab that merely granting people new abilities is not enough. It's not enough to merely make life possible for people by giving people access to things. And this is our way of sort of challenging the field of accessibility research and assistive technology development. So I like to use this headline here, which is that making life possible is not the same as making life equivalent for people. Let me give you an example to show you what I mean. So here is an apartment complex that was in Scotland, and this family, this made a lot of press a few years back. This family had a child that required a wheelchair, and so it was not possible for their kid to actually enter their apartment unit. And that was something that the Scottish government or the town government was responsible for making that happen. And so what the government did was say, oh, okay, what you need is a wheelchair ramp, right? And so let's give you this. And this is what the government put in place for that kid. And so let me just give you another angle on this thing, right, from the corner over there. As you can see from this solution, right, like this wheelchair ramp does make it possible to enter that apartment with a wheelchair, but it's definitely not an equivalent experience doing so. The only people that would ever use that wheelchair ramp on the right are the people who have to, and that's just not right. And so this is what I think is sort of the next frontier of accessibility or assistive technology research, is to go beyond merely making things possible. Go beyond merely providing access, for example, to a virtual reality, to mixed reality, and to work towards providing an equivalent experience. This is the kind of thinking that we do every day in the lab around video games. Even in the space of video games, which is very applicable to virtual reality and mixed reality, right? There's a stark contrast between what sighted players get, the types of experiences that they can have with games, and the types of experiences afforded to players who are blind. So let me give you an example with a puzzle game, which you've seen. This is Candy Crush. There are many other similar puzzle games such as Bejeweled, etc. So this is what a sighted player might experience when playing this game. It's a very Zen-like experience. They're swiping their fingers, tapping, making combos. They're just passing the time. Maybe they're riding the subway or they're on an airplane, just passing the time. And this is the experience that a blind player would have. And I shared my sound, so I hope you can hear the audio here. This is the blind version of Candy Crush.
Blue, green, yellow, red, green, blue, white, green, white, blue, white.
So naturally, the blind player wouldn't be able to see the screen. They're just swiping up, down, left, right, and hearing the colors. And then I think you do a two-finger swipe to actually swap gems if you realize that there are some matching colors in a row or a column. But clearly, there's a huge disparity in the experience that a sighted player has, which is a very casual Zen-like experience, and this like very intense, rote, memory-based game that the blind player would have to have. And so blind gamers, again and again and again, they bemoan the state of games for them, right? So there was this recent paper, which was presented at CHI recently, revealing the world of gamers with visual impairment. And one of the participants, this was a very representative quote, who went by Juan in the paper, said, quote, "Games for blind players are just really easy and simplistic when you actually get down to the action elements. They're very simple. So for example, take for example, an adventure game. Sighted players, you know, for example, here, this is Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. They get to roam around, look around, walk, they hear birds chirping, they see the grass, they explore, right? But games such as these adventure games made for blind players, they're a very different experience for blind players. The blind player would see something like this instead, which is, they would hear this, right? This is just a linear menu of interactable game objects within their vicinity. There's a bush 40 feet to the northwest. If you press down, there's a tree 95 feet north, down. There's a climbable wall 105 feet north. This is the world for the blind player, which is a very different world than what sighted players get to experience. In a lot of ways, you can think of games for blind players and these like sort of virtual worlds for blind players as being stuck in the 1970s. This screenshot here is Colossal Cave Adventure. This is actually, it's a command line adventure game. It's actually the first adventure game ever created. This was created back in 1977 on the command line. But if you look here in this game, you'll see the way they describe the world. You're inside a building, a well house for a large spring. There are some keys on the ground. There is a shiny brass lamp nearby. Very, very similar to how people who are blind experience actual games, experience mixed reality systems today, which is a very different experience than what sighted players play. And so that begs the question though, right? Is it an oxymoron to create like blind accessible video games or visual experiences such as virtual reality, virtual worlds that are highly visual that are blind accessible? Is that an oxymoron, right? Like you could argue that video games require video by definition. And many blind players even say this that I've spoken to, right? Video carries orders of magnitude more information than sound, than audio. The best that we can do is create audio games that are somehow fun to play. And actually, I guess the big motive, the motto behind my talk though, is that if you think differently, you can make this happen. Because what's important to experiences, to actual user experiences, whether that be in XR, whether that be in a video game, is the experience itself and not necessarily the visual information. So for example, right, so much of AI research is focused on perfectly recognizing every object, right? Like this is a self-driving car, perfectly recognizing every object within a 3D or virtual world, and then somehow communicating that to players, usually in the form of some menu after it's been parsed. But it doesn't have to be that way. In fact, game designers often talk about 8 types of fun, which are 8 criteria, 8 ways, I'll say 8 ways that players extract value out of games, out of virtual experiences. Sensation, fantasy, narrative, challenge, right? These are ways that players actually find games fulfilling. And if you look at this closely, there's only one, arguably, which is sensation, that might rely on visuals, right? Like, oh, I'm going into this new world and wow, look how great the graphics are. Look how interesting this new environment is. That relies on visuals, but all of these other types of fun that, that video games afford don't rely on visuals. And so it should be possible. Put a different way, the experience that a player has is not just about the visual information they see, but is rather about 2 things: their ability to perceive the world and their ability to make meaningful choices. And so if you want to make it so that blind gamers or visually impaired gamers have the same experiences as sighted players when playing a game, it's important to give them the same perceptual abilities, the ability to perceive information that's important just as sighted players can in the time frame that sighted players can, like with speed, with rapidness, and the ability to make the same gameplay decisions from moment to moment that sighted players can make. And so I'll show you 2 examples of work in the lab, how we were able to think about this and work through this problem. First project that I'll talk about is Navstick, which is a system for self-directed navigation. We're presenting this next month at WIST in October. And this is a system that makes it possible for blind players to play 3D adventure games such as this one. And then the second project that I'll show is the racing auditory display, or the RAD for short. And this was presented at CHI a couple years back. And this is about making it possible for players to play racing games. That is, like, can we help blind players perceive a complex visual world in real time so that they can make steering decisions just like this blind player shown in the top left, so that they can actually race without pausing the game and understand, you know, the layout of the track and where their car is and all of that stuff. So let's hop into it. So first we'll talk about Navstick. And this was a somewhat larger project, which was headed by Vishnu Nair, who's my PhD student, and a team of other students at both at Columbia and in the case of Faizan at SUNY New Paltz. And so this was a big collaborative effort, and I should say that I'm borrowing a lot of the snazzy visuals from Vishnu, courtesy of Vishnu. I'm stealing them. Those are my advisor powers. So Navstick is our lab's response to how researchers currently think about navigation systems. Systems such as Google Maps is shown here, and even indoor navigation systems is shown here. The way that researchers typically think about navigation tools today is as, like, they should be tools that give users turn-by-turn directions. They're essentially following a guide or a guide dog metaphor, which is these tools act as guides that users must follow, right? Turn left now, turn right now, turn left, right? And so, for example, in the world of, in the realm of audio navigation, which is very common in XR systems, you often see concepts such as audio beacons, where this is a top-down view of a user. Maybe a sound plays in front of them. They have to center their walking direction so that the sound is centered right in front of them. They walk towards it. When they reach that audio beacon, another one appears, right? It's just forming a point by point, turn by turn directions almost. They rotate, they walk towards it, boom, they found it. That's how audio beacons usually work. It's a guide, it's a siren call that you have to merely follow as a user. Navcog is similar. Let me play a brief video. This is for helping people navigate indoor real-world environments.
Turn around. You might be going backward. Proceed 25 meters and turn right.
So also following directions. And then Cabot is a more recent system coming from Carnegie Mellon University, which uses a self-driving suitcase robot that the user holds onto and kind of follows, similar to holding onto a guide dog. So the suitcase is driving and the user is just kind of reacting and even getting tugged and pulled along by the suitcase, right? But when it comes to navigation, just making navigation possible is not the same thing as making the navigation experience equivalent. Navigation is not just about turn-by-turn directions, getting from point A to point B. There's a lot more to it that's fulfilling to users, right? That's not served by current systems. How do you survey your surroundings and understand how items around you are arranged? How do you form cognitive maps of the spaces around you? This is true in video games. This is true in AR, you know, if there's a lot of AR content around, how do you understand that and how it's registered in the environment? This is true in virtual reality as well. And so in short, navigation is about looking around. And I'm not the only crazy person that's thinking this way. I was very pleased to find recently an article published in Nature by Mar Gonzalez-Franco, last author and other colleagues at Microsoft Research and other places, which is really rethinking turn-by-turn directions as well. So this made Nature just like 2 months ago. And they found some really interesting results. So what they did was they tested a system, an alternative to Google Maps, turn-by-turn directions. And they found, so on the left is turn-by-turn directions, getting from one point to another. Users are following these strict paths. But then they tried another approach where they're not strictly giving turn-by-turn directions, but they're kind of giving a general sense of where the destination is, and that's about it. And they found that users actually explored more and learned more about their surrounding environments and actually appreciated that fact. That's on the rightmost chart. So our research question here with the Navstick project is, how can computers facilitate looking around while navigating and really understanding the space around you rather than just following orders and following a guide, a virtual guide? And so our response to that was to build in a control for looking around into a video game controller. So Navstick repurposes a game controller's right thumbstick as an instrument for looking around. And so just by rotating the stick in different directions, you can actually quickly survey what's at your 12 o'clock, your 1 o'clock, your 3 o'clock, just by rotating the stick in different directions. And so what this allows us to do is, because we're repurposing that right analog stick. So here's the thing. Usually in video games, the right analog stick controls the game's camera. But if you're blind, then the camera is pretty much useless. And so we were able to take advantage of that fact, repurpose it as an instrument for looking around so that whether you're sighted or you're visually impaired or blind, you can use the right analog stick to understand and survey your surroundings. And so here's a sample little grocery store that we created showing Navstick in action.
Dark chocolate chip cookies, butter, croissants.
And so that was a quick little glimpse, but that the sound that you hear from Navstick is spatialized. So as you're rotating the stick, you're actually hearing virtual speakers in different directions. And then Navstick also takes advantage, I'll go back here. Navstick takes advantage of the fact that looking around should be both it should provide random access. So you should be able to look around in any direction at any time. So you just simply tilt the stick in any direction. And that looking around should be on demand. The system shouldn't always be telling you what's around you. It shouldn't push information to you. Users should be able to actually look around on demand. And so the only time that Navstick ever talks to you as a user is when you're tilting that stick.
Bananas.
So I'll skip ahead to this video showing Navstick in use in a 3D adventure game that we created called The Explorer. So here's a quick glimpse of that. And so this is a real game that sighted players can play, but the player here is not using graphics at all, naturally. They're only using sound and navigating through the game world and playing the game using Navstick. So we wanted to investigate several aspects of Navstick's use. First and foremost, we wanted to understand how well does Navstick serve different navigation tasks or purposes? Purposes such as exploring the environment, exploration, searching for things. Like maybe you really do just want to get from point A to point B. Can Navstick help you get to point B fast? And comparing different routes. Maybe in a grocery store, you could reach that aisle by going forward and then right, or maybe right and then forward. How does Navstick work at facilitating these different tasks? The second thing that we wanted to, and another task is actually this image here, which is gaming. Right? Like gaming is usually, it involves different flavors of exploration, different styles of exploration than real world or like task-driven grocery store navigation. And so we built several different video games, including this recreation of a classic video game called Terraformers, which Ricardo even mentioned earlier, and also The Explorer, which is the game shown in these screenshots here. Second question around Navstick was how well does it facilitate navigating in different environments, in different conditions, such as moving enemies on top and environmental occlusions on the bottom, also time pressure. And so we use the Explorer and this virtual grocery store as test harnesses. In the case of this 3D adventure game, The Explorer, each of these game segments, we designed these levels such that they had different combinations of time pressure, moving enemies, and occlusion. So we could actually test different combinations of environment. And by occlusion, I mean lots of trees blocking the way, or maybe a room that's shaped like a letter C, or a letter U, where you can't see the entire room when you're standing at one end, that sort of thing. And so this is our first result that we got from the Navstick project, which is, so here, we tease apart exploration and search, et cetera, somewhat here, but let me just focus your attention on the third row, which is this exploration non-directional. I'm sorry, the top row, exploration directional. It turns out for different types of exploration tasks, users prefer either Navstick, shown in blue, or simple menu-based surveying, shown in red, depending on what their goal is. I guess the big result of this chart, what this chart is trying to say, is that users actually don't strictly prefer Navstick looking around to using a menu. Actually, they highly prefer to have both, and they prefer different options, either a menu or Navstick, depending on their navigation task. So if it's kind of understanding, okay, I'm in a grocery store aisle and I want to know what corner of the aisle the milk is, and in general, where in the aisle I can find the bread, they would prefer Navstick. And that's what the first two rows are. Anytime direction matters, they highly prefer Navstick. But if they only want to get from point A to point B, or they only want to know what are the contents of the aisle, right? Like, is milk in aisle 8, period? Then they actually mostly prefer using a menu for that. And in the case of a video game task, almost everyone prefers using Navstick, and they mention that they especially appreciate the agency afforded by Navstick. So here, we're showing the quality of the mental map that players form when using this traditional status quo menu-based surveying and Navstick. And we actually had them survey a grocery store aisle, kind of remember where items were, and then we quizzed them on it. So we're actually testing their mental map. And then you notice with Navstick, they perform much better, and there's a much smaller variance in performance with Navstick than when they use the menu. And regarding the Explorer, this 3D adventure game, one of the questions was like, is Navstick alone like sufficient for beating the game? And we found that all of our players were able to complete all game segments within the Explorer using Navstick. We also found that Navstick, this was one of the top findings, really exhibited agency, player agency. So here I'm showing one particular room within the Explorer. This was segment 8. The player's on the left with the blue light, and then there's a pressure pad on the right, which is the red. The player has to make it, the black circles are trees, so those are occlusions. And the two-way arrows are chompers, the enemies walking around back and forth. So players had to defeat chompers and make it to that pressure pad to open a door on the right and progress. And you notice each one of these trails here shows a player's movement path, the trajectory that they took going around that level. And you notice that these 8 different players actually had completely different strategies, and they made totally different choices when playing that level. They were not railroaded at all, as with current navigation systems. They got to make their own choices and form their own strategies. And a lot of the qualitative feedback also showed that players like highly valued that. So now let me play a quick video, like quote, from one of our actual user study participants with his permission.
That is cool.
Chocolate chip cookies, dark chocolate, or puff croissants.
I do like that.
Butter.
I like the concept of looking around.
Dark chocolate, chocolate.
I would have actually never thought of that, and I'm a developer. That's kind of embarrassing. That's really cool. I like that.
And so regarding like occlusion, time pressure, enemy movement, like how well does Navstick handle these different environmental conditions? We actually found that players were not frustrated, were hardly frustrated with using Navstick when enemies were moving. That's the third row here. But they became like, many players became pretty frustrated with occlusions. And so we found that like one of the weak spots of being able to look around in this way is environmental occlusions. What if a tree is blocking your view of some part of the room? What if the environment is shaped like a letter C or a letter U and you can't see the entire room? That we found to be an opportunity for future work. How can you not only give players the ability to look around, but also to understand the shape of a space and to communicate occlusion well? As a sighted person, you can see, you can usually see a gradient on the wall, some discontinuity in depth to understand, okay, there's probably more room over here. There's a corner that I'm not seeing. But how do you give that sort of information to someone who's blind or visually impaired? And so I'm not going to describe this problem or this project in much depth, but I do just want to say that we actually did some follow-up work on this. And Ricardo, who introduced me today, was involved. So this took place this summer. Vishnu and Brian Ma and some of these other some other folks who were involved with Navstick continued this work. And the idea was to explore how different techniques for making a mini-map, a miniature map, accessible to people who are blind, either using sound or touch to actually try different techniques and pit them against each other. So we actually created a dungeon escape game. It's called Dungeon Escape, in which you have these rooms of different shapes and sizes and layouts, and there are objects that you need to collect to solve puzzles, to grab keys, to unlock doors, to get to the next. It's a complex game, and so it's important to be able to communicate, like, how is this room shaped and where are items within this room to players. I should say that this work here, this blind accessible mini-maps work, is currently in submission. And so that's why I'm not going in depth. This is like, we literally just submitted this to a conference a few weeks ago. So hopefully we get good news and we'll be able to say more about it in the months to come. But we tested a few different tools here. So we actually developed a companion smartphone map on the top left, in which you can actually tap and drag your finger around to hear different things within the environment. A shock wave that builds on the concept of echolocation, that's on the top right. A directional scanner, very similar to Navstick, where you can actually hear where objects are and also hear where walls are and like wall contours just by scrubbing with the right stick. And then a simple audio menu, the status quo means of figuring out where items are. And so we actually held a series of user studies in which we, to actually pit these different techniques against each other and learn the nuances of which work better in what situations and which do players prefer and for what reasons. So let me transition to the second project, which is the Racing Auditory Display, or the RAD for short. This was a collaboration with Professor Sri Nair at Columbia, and this was at CHI 2018. So this project in some ways is, you could think of this as building on Navstick, right? Navstick is a very, I consider it a very foundational project, which is like people should have the ability to look around, and like actually be able to look around to perceive the world around them, whether that be real or virtual. This project, the RAD, is about how do you give people the ability to perceive this complex visual environment in real time without slowing down the action, without the player having to pause and stop and like look around and then move. Right. And so that's why we focused on racing games here, is actually because racing games are very challenging for a couple reasons, or they're very challenging because they're in real time and you can't really pause, like you have to keep playing, you're moving, right? But at the same time, there's only so much information that needs to be conveyed at any given time, really kind of what the car is doing, what the track is doing, upcoming turns. And so I considered this a tractable problem. Let me show you the current approach for making racing games blind accessible. I'm going to show you a game called Top Speed 3. This is an audio game made specifically for people who are blind. Let me actually just show you a gameplay clip. And by show, it's going to be audio because it's an audio game. So here it comes.
Right. Easy left. Asphalt. Easy right. Right. Gravel. Easy left, left, hard left.
So that's the usual approach to racing games, which is, again, just kind of tell the player which way to turn and when, and have the player follow orders, right? So these games feel very different from racing games that sighted players would experience, because these games are just a test of reaction speed. There's no real track simulated in the game. There's no physics. There's no sense of inertia. It's just a test of reaction speed. It's a very distilled version of a racing game. And so our goal with the RAD, with the Racing Auditory Display, or the RAD, I should say our goal with this project was to create a true racing auditory display, a RAD, to give players a feel of racing so that they don't just follow orders. And so this was in contrast to a basic auditory display. And there's an obvious acronym here, which you can guess. And so the RAD, the way that we solved this problem is actually we raced and I personally did this, raced a whole bunch of laps again and again and again, and recorded myself racing around the track. And then I analyzed the video recordings from moment to moment to understand what pieces of visual information are important here at every single moment. What was I basing my steering decisions off of? So I did this for both me and for other players. To understand what are the relevant pieces of visual information so that I get the same perception. A blind person would get the same perception, and they'd get to make the same choices from that same information as a sighted player. And so the answer, as it turned out, was there are two pieces of information that were important. And so we created two audio cues to facilitate this information. First is the sound slider, which communicates a car's positioning on the racetrack. Second is a turn indicator system, which communicates the nature of upcoming turns. So let me just briefly go over these two different audio cues. So the sound slider here is, the way I like to explain it is, imagine you're sitting directly behind the car that you're controlling, so you can hear the sound of the car's engine right in front of your face. As you're steering left and right, directly controlling that sound, it slides laterally in front of you to the left or to the right, almost like you're positioned behind the car. And so if you, the really interesting thing here is that if you kind of look behind the curtain, it's an interesting computational problem, because on the left, you have a very complex track geometry, right? Like how the car is positioned on the racetrack and what the racetrack is doing. And somehow we have to compute from this very complex visual information some value X between 0 and 1, which represents the location of the sound slider on a spectrum, where 0 is the left side of the slider of this lateral bar, and then 1 is the right side. So the question is, what should X be given that information, or given the car's current positioning on the racetrack? And so one idea for what X should be is maybe it should just represent the car's lateral position. So if the car is positioned in the middle of the racetrack, meaning like right in between the left and right edges or walls of the track, maybe the sound slider should be centered. And if the car is kind of on the left side near the left wall, maybe the sound slider should be towards the left. Sounds good in theory, but one problem with this idea is that if you consider this case where the car is in the middle of the track on a straightaway, and then at the end of the straightaway, there's immediately a sharp left turn, it will change really rapidly, right? So the car here is at greater risk of hitting an edge, and the player won't have enough time to react for that turn. And so what I mean to say here is if you look at the car in these two situations, in the middle of the track but on a straightaway, versus in the middle of the track but at the precipice of a sharp left turn, there's a big difference in whether the player is at risk of hitting an edge of the track. The player's in the middle of the track in both cases, but the player's in much more danger in the rightmost case. And so what the sound slider, I'll show this other example too. Here, these cars are both on the left edge of the track, but clearly one of these cars, the one on the right that's pointed off center, is at a greater risk of going off the track. And so the key insight is that players base their steering decisions on the relative danger of hitting either side of the track. And their risk tolerance for cutting corners. And so for an arbitrary piece of track, we should be communicating the relative risk of hitting either edge of the track. So we might compute the lengths if the player were to steer fully left, how long would it take for them to hit the left edge? Versus if they were to steer fully right, how long would it take for them to hit the right edge? And maybe we take the ratio of those distances or of those times, and that can be the sound slider value. That can be X, right? So it'd be like the length of the left arc over the sum of the length of both arcs. So that's X. And it turns out that handles these conditions very gracefully. So on the left, if you compute the arcs here, you'll see that the sound slider should be centered if the track is straight and the car is pointed straight. But in the rightmost case, where the car is at the precipice of a turn, the left arc is much longer than the right arc. And so actually the player is at a much greater risk of hitting the right side of the track, and it should be communicated accordingly. Likewise here, in this case, if you compute the lengths of the arcs, in the leftmost case, where the car is against the left wall but pointed straight, they are at more risk of hitting the left edge. And so that should be communicated. Whereas if you just rotate the car in the same position and make it off center, then maybe they're less at risk of hitting the left edge. Okay. And then this one's easier to explain, which is the turn indicator system. And the idea here is to communicate the nature of upcoming turns. That is the direction, the sharpness, the timing, and the length of upcoming turns. And so the way that the turn indicator works is as follows. As the player approaches the turn, they first hear an announcer announce the number of the turn. So it might say 8. Meaning that's turn 8. It helps them memorize, remember what the turns are. And then immediately after hearing that number 8, they'll hear a series of 4 beeps, and they'll sound like woom, 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 woom. And they'll hear the beeps on the left if it's a left turn. They'll hear the beeps on the right if it's a right turn. The pitch of the beep indicates the sharpness of the turn, and there are 3 different turn sharpnesses. Just to keep things simple, it's split into 3 different sharpnesses. And the reason why there are 4 beeps is that they establish a rhythm, and the turn itself will actually start on the 4th beep. And so the fact that there are 4 beeps helps the player understand exactly when the turn is going to start. And then that last beep, that whoom, is really long because it communicates the length of the turn. It continues sounding as long as the player is in the turn. So that's how the turn indicator system works. It sounds kind of like this.
9, 10.
So that was a soft but short right turn, turn 9, followed by a sharper and longer left turn, turn 10. Okay, so together, the sound slider and the turn indicator system allows players to perform a variety of actions that sighted players get to do in games. Learning the track layout, aligning their car with the heading, pointing it straight, understanding the current speed, cutting corners, even advanced racing maneuvers such as choosing between an early or a late apex. This is all possible with the RAD. So let me show you a short clip of a player racing with the RAD.
10.
So I should mention that was this player's 3rd time ever around this track. And so there were cases where like he even remembered some of the turns, like turn 17 happens to be a really long 270-degree turn. He was able to remember that. So a couple other results from the RAD, then I'll offer a couple closing thoughts and take questions. We compared mean lap times between sighted players playing with vision and players who are blind playing with the RAD. That's in blue, that's the middle chart. And we actually found no significant difference between these lap times. We were the sighted players that we had as study participants were all casual gamers though. If you were to pit one of these blind gamers playing the RAD against an experienced gamer who's sighted, they wouldn't be, the difference would not be non-significant. There would be a difference. On bottom is the lap times from a status quo, let me tell you which way to turn and when system, a driver assistance system that just tells the player, turn left, turn right, turn left, right, left, right. That's on bottom, and that was slower. And if we look at driving paths between the RAD, this is the racetrack here in blue, the RAD's in blue, and this like driver assistance system in red, we actually see some interesting things. So if you notice on the bottom left, with the RAD, with the blue line, they're able to thread the needle in this S turn, whereas with the driver assistance system, they could not. And in the middle, the bottom middle, the orange cutout there, you notice that they're always like snaking with the driver assistance system. Whereas with the RAD, they can keep straight. It's much easier for the player to understand how their car is positioned on the track from moment to moment with the RAD. And they can, the player is able to cut corners and kind of choose how risky they'd like to race. So some closing thoughts for in terms of the path going forward for helping people understand and perceive like virtual environments. Ultimately, I see AI and the work that even the XR Access community is doing as creating enabling technology. I like to visualize the work in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you have these basic needs on the lower levels of a pyramid, such as food, water, safety, security, shelter, that sort of thing. And then these like higher level self-fulfillment needs, achieving one's potential, being creative, feeling of accomplishment towards the top of the pyramid. If you think about a lot of assistive technology today, it's really about making life possible. How do you fulfill these basic needs and allow people to, actually do day-to-day activities that they need to do basic, right? And so technology, you can think of this as this slab where, you know, this slice where, okay, we have these basic needs fulfilled, and we're kind of working outward to find more basic needs that, that need fulfilling. But I like to joke that, you know, being in New York and you know, at Columbia, we like to build up. And so I see the future of assistive technology as in fostering agency. How do you encourage these, how do you go up and encourage these higher level needs, these self-fulfillment needs? How do you go from building simply wheelchair ramps that provide access and make life possible to actually making life equivalent and fulfilling? Happy to take your questions. And yeah, thanks for listening. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Brian. I think I say for everyone that that was an amazing talk. Does anyone want to, maybe you can unmute and ask a question, or we can pick up from the chat? We only have 5 minutes. If anyone, yeah, if anyone wants to go ahead and do some questions.
Hey, Brent, Dr. Smith, thanks so much for the talk. This is really fantastic. I wanted to make sure to call out, we just saw yesterday, some of us were at a meetup with Aaron Gluck from, I think, Clemson University, working on blind VR, focused mostly on haptics. I guess I'm curious where you see the relative importance of sound versus haptics and how these can support each other in, you know, either 2D or 3D gaming.
Yeah, I actually don't have a strong opinion there between sound and haptics. I encourage exploring both. One of, like, I think that haptics can work in certain situations, and like with the mini map project, one of our mini maps was haptic. It was the smartphone screen that the user would, you know, move their finger around, and they'd get a sense proprioceptively of where their fingertip is, and they'd understand the room's shape in that manner. I actually think that one thing that I don't like seeing, I guess, in the research community is a propensity to immediately choose one approach over the other. Okay, this should be sound, this should be haptics. I think we should be more open-minded to trying both. And I think the real challenge between sound and haptics is learning when and how they can be combined. Sometimes, like when you use sound and haptics together, they work really, really well. But sometimes if you change just a little bit about how either the sound or the haptics is displayed, it's kind of like patting your shoulder and rubbing your elbow at the same time. It's really, really hard to work. And so like I'm really interested in learning, like, cognitively, when are these things concordant and when are these things dissonant, so that we can form a better, like, design toolbox around both sound and haptics. Cool. And I see some questions in the chat. Yeah, thanks for the nice comments, everyone.
We have a question from before, from Jesse. He asked, can you read it? Do you see it?
Yeah. So it's this whether environments are mostly flat or complex. That's the first question I see from Jesse. Yeah, so that, like, short answer there is environments were, you know, all the screenshots we showed were the actual game, the jungle, the enemies moving around, that sort of thing. And so, like, players were able to scrub Navstick and actually hear all of those things: trees, enemies, pressure pads, doors. So we did make them complex. The Last of Us Part 2 and a lot of existing games, right? They are very, very complex environments, even more complex than what we created, I would argue. But the difference is that for a blind person, that complexity is not passed on. The blind player's understanding or display of that information is very different from what a sighted player sees, right? Like, they don't get, they get to hear kind of like where some enemies are, and then they're essentially railroaded along their objective in The Last of Us Part 2. Another question from Jesse. When do I think tech like this will move out of the lab and be in APIs? Yeah, one of my goals is actually to make it so that game engines such as Unity have these sorts of like Navstick-like features built in, so that any 3D world that a developer puts together, upon export, they become Navstick compatible or RAD compatible. I'm very, very interested in like putting together the building blocks of accessible gameplay, whether that be looking around or following a path like in the RAD or a racetrack, and maybe combat. Any of those like basic building blocks of accessible gameplay I'm super interested in.
We have another question from Karen.
Do we think we can fully integrate so that everyone can enjoy the same game? Yeah, I think that's definitely possible. Yeah, yeah, one of like a side project that I might work on with like maybe perhaps an undergrad or master's student might be to add multiplayer to the RAD. And I think that's very, very possible. That shouldn't be hard at all, actually. And so like you can imagine, I think this is interesting. This opens a possibility for a sort of a blind Turing test. That would be the standard of like whether you're actually providing a blind player the same experience. If they hopped into a multiplayer match with another player, would the other player be able to tell that they're blind? That would be one way of judging that. Yeah.
Okay, do we have any more questions, or because it's time's up and anyone?
The next Forza needs this, Jesse says.
Yeah.
They reached out to me a little while back. That's something I'm excited to maybe work on with them. Yeah, I'd love that. Yeah.
Okay, everyone, then that's all for today. This is I'm showing this slide again. If you want to join us or receive the latest news about the XR Access Initiative and about the research network, please follow us in Twitter. You can also email us at info@xraccess.org. And Jesse, do you want to talk about the institutional membership, maybe? Jesse. Sorry.
Maybe we follow up on Slack.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks again, everyone, for coming here today. We are very excited to have more speakers here. And thank you again, Brian. That talk was amazing. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And yeah.
Cool. Yeah, no problem. Very happy to, yeah. Thanks for having me. And Ricardo, we miss you in the lab.
I also miss the lab. I will come back.
Have a good rest of your week, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.